Catherine Lontock, and I'm the Public Outreach Manager here at the American Society for Microbiology. I'd like to welcome everyone who braved the rain to come out in person, and everyone who is watching online. Tonight we are very excited to have for Microbes After Hours. We're going to screen the documentary Spillover, Zika, Ebola and Beyond, which was produced by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute Tangled Bank Studios. Before we get to the film, I want to introduce our two filmmakers here that we have with us here tonight. Mr. James Barrat is an award-winning writer, director, and producer of documentary films spanning topics in history, archaeology, and science. His films have been broadcast by world-renowned outlets such as Discovery, National Geographic, PBS, and the BBC. For this evening's film, he actually did quite a bit of work and was the writer, director, producer, and narrator. Many hats. Dr. Aileen O'Hearn earned her PhD in microbiology and immunology at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She did her postdoc at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases at Fort Detrick, and focused on diagnostics and surveillance of viruses such as Ebola and Lassa virus. And in case you don't know, those require biosafety level 4 containment. So if you've ever seen outbreak or contagion, they're wearing those full suits with the air coming out of the back, and there's a decontamination room. That is BSL 4. She also was on the ground in Sierra Leone during the West African Ebola outbreak. And as a science education fellow at HHMI Tangled Bank Studios, she provided editorial and research support for the film. In addition to our filmmakers, I'd like to thank HHMI for partnering with us to make this event possible. And in particular, I'd like to thank my counterpart, Dr. Laura Helft, who is their Senior Manager for Public Outreach and Evaluation. So Mr. Barrat and Dr. O'Hearn are going to introduce the film briefly, and then we'll have question and answer with them after the film is done. So for those of you in the room, you will queue up at the microphone. For those of you watching online, you can enter your questions into the YouTube chat, or you can post them on Twitter using the hashtag ASMLive. All right.
I've already got one. Thanks. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank the American Society for Microbiology for screening this film. My name is James Barrat. I am the writer, producer, director, and narrator of Spillover, and I'll be handing out popcorn later and cleaning up afterwards. Howard Hughes Medical Institute has a long track record of making educational films and distributing them to classrooms for free. And the last 5 years, they've broadened out into broadcast, and they've made films about topics they thought were medically interesting and timely for a wide audience. They've had shows on PBS, on the Smithsonian Channel, and other broadcasters about Alzheimer's, about vaccines, and about evolution, and now about spillover, about zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases, as you know, are those that start in the animal world and then spill over. That's where we get the term spill over into humans. When I got involved in this film, I was struck by how dynamic spillover diseases are, how dynamic zoonotic diseases are. One expert we quote in the film said that in the last half century, the number of zoonotic diseases has quadrupled. A lot of that is discovery. A lot of that is also how we are interacting with wild places, how we're exposing ourselves to viruses that exist in the natural world because we're encroaching on habitats. But as we were making the film, a lot of things were changing. New diseases were coming out. For example, Zika came out while we were making the film. And it was just a year ago that the first babies in Brazil were being diagnosed with microcephaly. And about 6 months later, they determined with some confidence that that the virus Zika in mothers led to microcephaly in infants. But just a week ago from today, scientists came out and said that the mechanism by which the virus has invaded the baby's brains, the infant's brains in the womb, were completely different than what they'd thought. So that part is changing all the time. It's been about 2 years since Ebola was contained in West Africa, and we deal a lot with Ebola in this film. But just a week ago, we learned that the version of Ebola, the version of Ebola virus Zaire that infected people, had come about as a mutation in the first few weeks of the outbreak 3 years ago. So it was a whole new version. We were, as filmmakers, trying to account for how rapidly the disease had spread, and we talked to all the experts about how quickly it had spread, and they had a lot of reasons for why it might have spread, as you'll see in the film. But one reason they were hypothesizing about, but not really getting deeply into, was did it mutate? Because it would seem to be behaving much more aggressively, and it turns out that the version of Zaire Ebola virus that infected and killed 10,000 people in West Africa was much more effective at invading human cells than prior versions. So the subject is very dynamic. It's changing all the time. Anytime you make a film, you're taking a snapshot of the state of these diseases, and the real picture is going to change over time. One way you can tell that the diseases are dynamic in this film is because Thomas Frieden, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, is wearing 2 different sports jackets. This is because we finished the film, or we thought we'd finished the film, and then Zika was kind of maturing and turning out to be a real big issue about a year ago. And we decided we couldn't make a film about spillover diseases without including Zika, so we went to Brazil, and we spent some time there, and we shot some segments about Zika, and we asked Dr. Frieden for another interview, and he was very generous with his time, but he couldn't be persuaded to wear the same clothes because, of course, he had other things on his mind than styling for us. I'm going to hand you off now to Dr. Aileen O'Hearn. When we were making this film, we had the great benefit of having with us as a consultant and advisor someone who'd been in Sierra Leone and other places in West Africa at the height of the Ebola outbreak, and she was used to wearing all the level 4 gear, but she's not tonight, so we can recognize her. Thanks very much. We'll be asking questions later. Save your coat ticket. I'll need that to hand you back your coats after the film.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here tonight. Thank you, Catherine, and everyone at ASM for having us. I actually had a considerably minor role in the film compared to James, only like 1 hat, maybe 2 hats, maybe. And but it was a wonderful experience, and it really showed me the importance of science education and the role that needs to be played to get this information out there, because I think, as a lot of people here probably know, that the importance of public education of science is often lost in the scientist's mind. So being able to have this opportunity has been fantastic. The role I played overseas and being able to be a part of the response to the Ebola outbreak was one of the most valuable experiences that I've had in my life so far. And to be able to use that knowledge and turn it into, or contribute what I could to this project has been a really great experience. And working with James and Howard Hughes Medical Institute has really been an eye-opener in that whole process. So I will keep my remarks pretty brief, and yeah, I look forward to talking to you all afterwards.
All right, everyone ready for the film? All right, get out your popcorn. All right, right, so now as promised, James and Aileen will be taking questions. If you have a question and you're here in the room, please line up at the microphone. If you have a question and you're watching online, please post it in the YouTube chat or on Twitter with the hashtag ASMLive.
Really beautiful presentation. I'm curious, among the viruses that are being monitored, how much new genetic information is being carried by these new strains that they're coming up with?
So if I'm not mistaken, and I'm sure the number has changed since they released the information, but at the end, Jana Mazet and her program had found, in their monitoring so far of, I think, a total of 5 years, they had found 800 new viruses that had not been sequenced before. Not to say that those are all zoonotic viruses, but ones that were new to our current catalog. So that's definitely a number higher than I would have ever expected, but a lot.
But the question that I'm asking actually is perhaps overreaching for the information that has been given out. I guess what I'm asking is, what fraction of those are really new, are carrying new genetic information, are new strains that have not been seen ever before or are significantly different, divergent from the viruses that have already been sequenced? You may.
So yeah, I don't know if I can speak to any more than that, other than it was 800 new viral sequences as a whole, but more than that, I can't say.
This question is from a YouTube viewer, Kim Eldridge. Dr. O'Hearn, what was the most surprising aspect of your involvement overseas with the virus?
The most surprising thing I would say is the amount of publicity in the U.S. and how much it was expected that they had the help they needed over there when they really did not. For a long time, there was very little help over there. They weren't getting what they needed. They weren't getting, the hospitals weren't getting what they needed. The patients weren't getting what they needed. And it wasn't until well into the outbreak that the help from the U.S. and other countries was really realized there, and too long.
With the, with Zika, we saw how they're, manipulating some mosquitoes, and that's kind of one of the strategies being used among other mosquito suppression. But the issue that's caused so many of these zoonotic diseases, which is, eating of bushmeat and kind of encroaching into these habitats. What is we can talk about it all we want over here, but I feel like what's the cultural reaction, or is there any connection among people living in these places that this encroachment is actually the cause of these diseases? Is that something people are aware of? And then, what are the local areas? Because epidemiology is not something you can do remotely. It's, as you know.
James might have actually some experience from filming at each of these locations, because I was only at one, so.
Well, it's interesting because what we consider, we go out and hunt deer every year, a good number of us do, and that's bushmeat. And a lot of the spillover doesn't occur over there, it occurs everywhere. We can't tell people to stop eating bushmeat. It's like telling them to stop eating, because a lot of the world relies on bushmeat as a source of protein. So they do understand it's not always safe, and it turns out it's often not safe. But it's really hard. It's really, of the epidemiologists and experts I spoke with, it's really hard to get the people to change that behavior. They had luck changing. You'd think that if you told people that drinking date palm sap might poison you, that they'd stop drinking date palm sap. But it turns out if you've been drinking it for generations, it doesn't even make a dent. So what they do find, the most effective way to control spillovers is to try to bolster healthcare systems in remote places. because then it's more or less inevitable that these spillover viruses will occur there or here. What can be done better is to make sure that the local healthcare is better everywhere, because as a couple of the experts said, a problem anywhere becomes a problem everywhere. So.
And I will say that as you mentioned on the local level, if you don't have a group at a location that can speak openly with the community there, you have no reach. You really need someone in that health system or someone in that community that can really speak to them and that they trust, because Americans going over to Sierra Leone and Brazil are not, they don't want to see those people tell them what they should be doing to prevent disease. They want someone that they know and trust to relay that information, or else it's never going to get through.
Hi, thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. I just want to follow up on that previous question. I actually come from Nigeria, and I know that when they're trying to control Ebola, they used a lot of the polio assets and they reappropriated them. Trying to figure out, because we all know the diseases and pandemic preparedness, you have to have a large interplay of obviously speaking to faith leaders as well and going out into the communities and being able to relate to the people on ground. So I'm wondering if you all are aware of how, for emerging diseases in the future, whether or not there are any systems in place for reappropriating current assets and how they're able to use forces on ground to better treat these diseases. Thank you.
Again, I can only speak for the area I was in Sierra Leone. The center that became a really large point of action for the Ebola outbreak was in Kenema, which had the ability to deal with Ebola only because of its previous experience with Lassa virus. So they already had a ward and laboratory and a large hospital system set up to deal with already a different hemorrhagic fever virus. So when Ebola came in, not to say they were completely prepared, but they had something to work with. And I think that's why they were able to be that center point for anyone that needed help. As far as in the future, if they plan on reaching that out, I'm not sure. But I do know that they are currently under construction for a larger hospital that holds, I want to say now they have maybe a 16-bed ward that was built there for Lassa. Now with Ebola having gone through, the one they have under construction, I think, is supposed to hold over 40 people, which obviously couldn't have contained this outbreak either and been able to support as many people as were infected, but it's better than what they had before.
I think there are several centers of excellence throughout Africa, like Kenema Government Hospital and Redeemers in Nigeria as well, and there's a bunch more. What's epidemiologists are trying to do through the One Health project and through PREDICT, and John Amazu was speaking about it at UC Davis, is try to anticipate some of these viruses by training people to test animals in the field and constantly be monitoring them and adding to the gene profile of emerging viruses and try to anticipate them. That said, we have trouble here. When Dr. Fauci from NIAID went to Congress to try to get money for Zika, they turned him down 2 or 3 times. And then when they gave him money, they didn't really give him money. They let him reallocate money he already had. So he was taking money, millions of dollars out of cancer, out of HIV, to treat Zika. So the awareness is, or the sort of lack of awareness is pretty widespread about these diseases and how severe they are, even when they're happening, even as the Zika outbreak is occurring.
Thank you.
This question comes from Dr. Amy Cullis on Twitter. Is it known what effect, if any, that Zika has on a developing infant's brain?
Well, yeah, if it's in the womb, it's if the infant is in the womb and the mother gets Zika virus, the effect can be pretty catastrophic. I don't know what percentage of babies are born with microcephaly, which is severe brain damage, much, much smaller heads and brains. But it's very dramatic if the infant's in the womb. Apparently, it's still pretty dramatic if the baby gets Zika outside the womb. Doctors we spoke with said that as long as the brain is developing, then Zika is a hazard.
Yeah, I think, as far as I know, the percentage that we originally thought it was of how many of these babies were actually infected with Zika is lower than originally thought, but it's still obviously a very severe outcome, so the risk is still up there. I can't speak to specifics beyond that, though.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, towards the end of the film, they showed some of the frontline health workers getting vaccinated for Ebola. Was that a vaccination specific to the Zaire form and the more mutated, the form that we think mutated to be more contagious? And I'm just curious if there's anything known as to the effectiveness of it and how many people have been vaccinated.
So the images in the film are based off of a trial that was going on, so they weren't giving it to everyone. But the results of that trial were very positive, very successful. And as far as the specificity, so the mutation that James had mentioned earlier about the mutation that occurred in the middle of this outbreak would not, I do not believe affected its immunogenicity. So if we have a vaccine against Ebola Zaire, it will work against a variety of strains of Ebola Zaire or varieties. But as far as, Ebola Sudan, Ebola Thai forest, these might not be covered by that. But that mutation was still within the realm of what they would consider Ebola Zaire virus. So despite that, theoretically, they would still be protected.
And the one other thing I was curious as to whether there were any severe side effects to getting the actual vaccination, because I was just curious. I know that some vaccinations will lead to a fever and things, and I was wondering if it was an extra reaction.
This particular vaccine was not a live or an activated version. It was, not a whole virus, so nothing other than, sore arm and, yeah.
Thanks.
Would it help to test the kills before they ate? Would it help to test the kills for the different diseases before the people ate them?
Oh,
that would make a lot of sense.
It would. I don't know why they're not doing that already. I'm sure when someone is hungry and they've got meat right in front of them, they want to eat that meat and they're not thinking about the diseases, but they really should. And it's an excellent point that they really people need to be aware of the risks of what they're eating. And yeah, that's a very good point.
Thanks.
Thanks you all
Thanks
very
very
much.
Thanks for coming.